She hasn't eaten in 5 days, and the only person she ever smiled at was a homeless boy with a piece of bread. Richard Evans never thought he'd hear his own voice tremble like that, not in a medical conference room filled with specialists he'd paid handsomely to fix his daughter. But there he was, a billionaire with bloodshot eyes torn between rage and helplessness, speaking aloud a truth he couldn't buy his way out of. Outside, the world saw power when they looked at him, but inside, Richard was breaking. His daughter, Emily, only 2 years old, was fading in front of his eyes. No food, no laughter, no spark, just silence. Until that one haunting afternoon in the park when a street child named Leo knelt beside her and with nothing but kindness and a crust of bread gave her something no one else could have reason to look up again. And now, Richard was about to do something that would shock everyone around him, something he once would have called insane. But if you stay with this story, you'll witness the moment a man who thought he had everything learns what it really means to have nothing, and finally everything. What happened next turned an empire of steel into a home built on love. The morning Richard Evans fired the nanny, he didn't think twice. His 2-year-old daughter Emily had just been hand-fed by a filthy street kid in the middle of Maplewood Park. A stranger, barefoot, shirtless, nothing but tattered denim shorts and a piece of dry bread in his hand, had approached her wheelchair, knelt beside her, and offered her food. She had taken it, willingly. And then she had smiled. It was that smile that haunted Richard. She hadn't smiled in weeks, not since the doctors delivered the diagnosis, a rare neurological disorder that had left her unable to walk, barely able to speak, and now refusing to eat. He had thrown millions at specialists across the country, private nurses, nutritionists, feeding therapists. Nothing worked. Emily would sit in her chair, vacant-eyed lips clamped, shut heart slowly dimming like the light in her once sparkling gaze. But that boy, that one boy, had done what no expert could. Richard had yelled, stormed across the grass like a thundercloud in an Armani suit. "Who the hell do you think you are, touching my daughter?" he roared, yanking the boy away and nearly tipping Emily's chair in the process. The boy, no older than 4, had frozen in terror. The nanny fumbled for excuses, but Richard didn't even look at her. "You're fired. Leave by sunset." Then he turned to the boy's guardian, an elderly woman in a worn shawl and sun-dried skin who had hobbled over. "He didn't mean any harm, sir," she had wheezed. "He was just sharing the only bread we had." Richard had scoffed, lifted Emily in his arms and walked away. But as the limousine pulled away from the curb, something tugged at him. He looked back through the tinted glass. The boy stood beside the woman holding her hand, eyes wide with confusion. Not pain, not fear, just something he couldn't name. Emily in his arms had turned too. She was staring back. For the first time in weeks, her eyes were alert, searching. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. He replayed the moment again and again. That boy Leo, the woman had called him, had knelt, smiled, and torn the bread in half, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And Emily had smiled back. The next morning, she refused everything again. Porridge, mashed bananas, even chocolate pudding. The nurse tried to coax her. Nothing worked. By noon, Dr. Angela Brooks stood beside Richard in the home clinic and said the words that chilled his spine. "We may have to insert a feeding tube. Her condition is deteriorating. I don't care what it costs." "Do whatever you have to," he muttered. Angela didn't move. "Richard, this isn't about money." He blinked. "What do you mean your daughter doesn't need more specialists? She needs something human, something emotional, maybe even spiritual." Richard scoffed. "What are you implying? I'm saying maybe we're not looking in the right direction." That night, Richard found himself in his home office staring at the security footage from the park. Unbeknownst to anyone, he had recorded the moment on his phone, part instinct, part obsession. He clicked play. There it was again, the smile. Emily's tiny, fragile smile. She had looked at that boy like he was light. For the first time in years, Richard felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Doubt, guilt, maybe even hope. He called James, his longtime driver. "Find that boy. I don't care how long it takes. I want him here." "Are you sure?" Sir James asked gently. "No," Richard said, "but I don't know what else to do." James spent 2 days combing Maplewood Park. On the third day, just before dusk, he spotted them. The old woman, Margaret Carter, and the little boy Leo were sitting on a bench sharing a pack of saltine crackers. When James approached, Margaret's posture stiffened. "We're not begging," she said flatly. "I'm not here to take anything," James replied. "Mr. Evans, he needs your help." Margaret blinked in disbelief. "Your boss? That man, the one who called my grandson, diseased James," lowered himself to Leo's eye level. "Do you remember the little girl in the wheelchair?" Leo nodded. "She was sad, but she liked my bread. She hasn't eaten since. And she smiled for you. We think maybe you could help again." Margaret looked down at her grandson. Leo was silent for a moment, then whispered, "Can I give her more bread?" Margaret swallowed hard. "We'll come, but he doesn't get yelled at again. Or we leave." When the car pulled up to the Evans estate in Hudson Valley, Leo's eyes widened like saucers. The massive gates, the marble pillars, the indoor elevator was another planet. Richard was waiting in the grand foyer, his face, older eyes lined with sleeplessness. "Thank you for coming," he said stiffly. He couldn't meet Margaret's eyes. "Emily is upstairs." The room was sterile, full of medical equipment, monitors, and a feeding pole no one had dared connect yet. Emily lay motionless on her side, eyes dull. But the moment Leo walked in, she turned her head. Her lips parted. Not a word, just recognition. Richard stepped back. Nurse Linda handed a bowl of warm broth to Leo. "Can you try?" Richard asked. Leo nodded, shy but focused. He scooped a spoonful, held it out. "Try it, it's good," he said softly. "One for you, one for me." To everyone's shock, Emily opened her mouth, took the spoon. Richard gripped the wall for balance. His knees nearly buckled. Spoon by spoon, she finished the bowl. Afterward, Leo smiled and whispered, "You're strong now." Emily smiled. Again. Nurse Linda was crying. Margaret was frozen. Richard. He turned away so no one could see his face, so no one would see the tears he didn't understand. That night, Richard stood beside his daughter's bed. She was asleep, peaceful. Leo's empty bowl sat beside her. A billionaire, a dying little girl, and a boy who had nothing but the power to change everything. And in that moment, Richard knew his entire life had just shifted. Not because of doctors, not because of money, because a child had shown him something he'd long forgotten: how to love without fear. We're just getting started. And you? Would you have let a stranger from the street into your home if it meant saving your child's life? If this story moved you, please drop a like and share your thoughts in the comments. Every heart and every kind word helps us bring more meaningful stories to life. It was supposed to be a one-time visit, a moment of desperate hope in a house that had forgotten how to breathe. But after that first miracle, Richard Evans couldn't bring himself to let the boy leave. Leo returned the next morning, this time by invitation. And every day after that, he brought no gifts, no toys, just crumbs of kindness and the natural magic of childhood. Emily began to eat regularly. She smiled when Leo walked through the door. She laughed at his made-up stories about dragons who couldn't fly and ants that played piano. And for the first time in her young life, she tried to lift her arms, small shaky movements that made even Nurse Linda choke back tears. Richard watched it all, every detail, every spoonful, every shared giggle, every breath of life returning to his daughter's cheeks. He used to spend 12 hours a day in boardrooms, giving orders that shaped skylines. Now he found himself standing silently in doorways, learning how to love his own child from a 4-year-old stranger. But the real shift happened when Margaret Carter and Leo moved into the guest house. Richard had offered gently at first, with hesitation, then with quiet urgency. "You'll have your own space, privacy. You'll be compensated fairly. Please, just stay." Margaret, proud and firm, only accepted under one condition. "I'm not a charity case, Mr. Evans. I can work. I used to be a governess. If we stay, it's on fair terms." Richard nodded. Welcome to the Evans household. But peace never lingers long when ghosts are still lurking. It started with a phone call. James, the driver, came upstairs with a furrowed brow. "Sir, there's a woman downstairs. Says her name is Rachel Carter. Claims she's Leo's mother." Silence froze the room. Richard felt something shift in his chest, a low thrum of unease he hadn't felt in weeks. Margaret, who had been folding tiny socks nearby, paled. "How did she find us?" Richard asked. James answered quietly. "She says a neighbor at their old building saw me picking up Margaret, traced the car, recognized the name on the mailbox." Richard stood slowly. "Don't tell Leo. Not yet. I'll speak to her." When he entered the sitting room, she was already standing. Rachel Carter, maybe 30, maybe younger. Her clothes were neat but clearly second-hand. Her posture defensive, like a boxer about to throw the first punch. "I'm here for my son," she said without greeting. Richard didn't move, after 2 years of silence. "Now I had nothing," she said. Arms crossed, I was drowning. No money, no job. I wasn't ready to be a mom. "But you're ready now," he asked quietly. "I found a job. I have a place. I want Leo back." "No," Richard said firmly. "What you want is something else." How much? Rachel flinched. "Excuse me, how much money would make you walk away again?" Her face twisted with indignation, but she didn't deny it. 100,000. That's what you want, right? Keep your little miracle boy and send me on my way. The words turned Richard's stomach. It wasn't the number. It was the sheer detachment in her voice, as if Leo was a lottery ticket she had just found under her shoe. Before he could reply, a voice cut the tension like glass breaking. "So this is what you've become." It was Margaret. She stood in the doorway, her eyes like steel, her back impossibly straight. Rachel froze, lips parted. "Mom, you left your son in my arms like he was a bag of groceries," Margaret said, her voice low and trembling. "And now you come here to sell him I didn't sell." "You never even asked how he was," Margaret snapped. "You didn't cry for him. You didn't look for him. You only came when you saw where he was living." Richard stayed silent, stunned by the pain in Margaret's voice. But then something inside him shifted. "Rachel," he said carefully, "I'm not giving you money. I won't pay you to disappear. But I will offer something else. A job. A real one. In one of my companies. With training, a salary, a future, and over time a chance to rebuild something with your son. If Margaret agrees to supervise." Margaret's eyes widened. Rachel stared speechless. "Why would you offer me that?" she asked. After everything, Richard took a breath. "Because I know what it's like to fail someone you love and be given a second chance." Rachel sat slowly, her expression unreadable. The silence stretched until she finally muttered, "And if I say no, if I still want him, then we go to court." Richard replied without blinking, "I'll win. But Leo will lose." That night, Richard sat beside Emily's bed, still shaken. She was asleep, curled under her blanket, her fingers holding onto the corner of a drawing. It was of her and Leo stick figures with wide smiles. Above them, she'd scribbled one word in crooked, childlike letters, family. The next morning, Rachel returned to accept the job offer. Margaret watched her with suspicion, but there was a flicker of hope behind the hurt. Maybe this time her daughter would fight for something real. But as the family began to shift again, a new knock came at the door. James appeared, clearing his throat. "Sir, there's someone else here to see you. A woman. Says her name is Clara." Richard froze. His throat tightened. Clara, his ex-wife, Emily's mother. James lowered his voice. "She's come from Paris, and she wants to see her daughter." And with that, the world tilted again. "We're so sorry to pause the story here, but what would you do if your ex suddenly showed up after years, right when your life had finally begun to heal? Let us know your thoughts below. And if you're moved by this story, please give it a like and drop a heart. Your support means everything. It's strange how the people we once pushed away often return just when we're finally ready to open the door. When Clara Whitmore stepped into the Evans estate after nearly 3 years away, she barely recognized it. The cold mansion she had left, once filled with silence monitors and emotional distance, was now pulsing with life. Laughter echoed down the halls. Toys cluttered corners. And the man she once loved stood before her, no longer buried beneath the weight of obsession, but standing lighter, calmer, human. Clara didn't speak at first. She just stared at Emily, who was now standing in the garden, laughing as Leo chased bubbles across the lawn. Her daughter, once fragile, motionless, unreachable, was now walking on her own, clumsy but determined. and beside her, the boy who had unknowingly mended a broken family. "She's smiling," Clara whispered, tears in her voice. "And she's walking." Richard nodded. It wasn't a miracle drug or a doctor. It was Leo, just Leo. Later that evening, they all gathered on the terrace for lemonade and quiet conversation. Clara watched as Margaret gently guided Leo and Emily to wash their hands before dinner. Daniele sat nearby, quieter than usual, watching her son with a softness that hadn't been there before. For the first time, all the threads of this makeshift family were in one place, trying to move forward. Clara turned to Richard. "I expected bitterness, walls, maybe even lawyers. But you, this place, it's changed." "So have I," he said quietly, "but not because I wanted to, because I had to." And then he added almost to himself, "It took a boy with nothing to teach me how to love everything." Days passed gently. Daniele began working at Richard's company, slowly earning not just a salary but trust. Leo, now more confident, was enrolled in a local pre-K class, something he'd never dared to dream of. Emily, meanwhile, continued to improve. She started using her walker independently, forming full sentences and telling the world stories only a 2-year-old could invent. But the most unexpected transformation happened inside Richard. He delegated control of his company for the first time in decades. He began reading bedtime stories instead of quarterly reports. He sat in the sandbox more than the boardroom. One afternoon, when a renowned neurologist from Boston called with news of a revolutionary treatment, Richard declined without hesitation. "She doesn't need to be fixed," he said gently. "She just needed to be seen and loved." One quiet evening, as golden light poured through the kitchen windows, Richard gathered everyone, Margaret, Clara, Danielle, and even James, around the dinner table. He held up a photograph, Leo and Emily on the beach, hand in hand, building a crooked sandcastle. "This," he said, voice thick, "is everything I never knew I needed." Then he turned to Daniele. "You could have walked away again, but you stayed. You tried. That matters more than your past." To Margaret, "You carried more weight than any mother should have to. You're the reason he survived. And now, you're the reason we all did." To Clara, "I was wrong. About Emily. About you. About love. I'm grateful you're back, no matter what form that takes." And to James, who simply smiled and said, "About time." The months ahead weren't perfect. There were setbacks, fears, days when old wounds tried to reopen. But they were no longer weathered alone. The family that had once been scattered by pain was now held together by something far stronger: choice. Clara eventually moved back from Paris, not into the mansion, but into a small house nearby, where she could co-parent Emily and be present without reopening old scars. Daniele kept her job and continued building her relationship with Leo. Margaret became more than the housekeeper; she was now the soul of the home. And Richard. He spent mornings making pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, and evenings walking hand in hand with his daughter through the garden. One sunny Saturday, Emily tripped while running toward Leo. Before anyone could move, Leo helped her up and said gently, "Everyone falls, but we stand up again." That night, Richard tucked Emily into bed, her favorite drawing clutched tightly in her hands, stick figures of herself, Leo, Margaret, Daniele, Clara, and him. "Daddy," she murmured, already half asleep. "Leo gave me bread that day, but now he gives me smiles." Richard leaned down, kissed her forehead, and whispered, "He gave us all something we didn't know we needed. A small act of kindness, a piece of bread, and a boy who had nothing except the heart to change everything." Now let me ask you, do you believe someone can completely change another person's life just by being kind? And would you give someone who once abandoned their child a second chance? We'd love to hear what you think of this story. If it touched your heart, comment number 3 below. If you're still unsure, comment number 2. And if it didn't land for you, we respect that too. Just type number 1. Tell us where you're watching from. We'd love to know. And if you enjoyed this journey, please drop a heart, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Thank you for being here.